I'm Ruby, and I've been working really hard as a manager at Horizon Hotels for the past 5 years. The income is sufficient for me to rent a respectable one-bedroom apartment in the city and save money each month for the day when I may purchase a home of my own. Since I graduated, I have aimed to find a location that truly belongs to me. Although they are decent people, my parents have always been living paycheck to paycheck. Mom works part-time in the cafeteria at an elementary school, and Dad is a warehouse supervisor. As we grew up, they provided for our food and clothing, but they never had anything more. We were cautious with our money, but not precisely impoverished. Then there's Jake, my brother. He is now 28 years old, 2 years my junior. And I swear that guy has never held down a job for more than 6 months straight. He dropped out of college in his 3rd year, which I helped pay for, by the way. And since then, it's been a revolving door of random jobs and even more random girlfriends. Classic Jake. About 2 years ago, he showed up at my door with 2 duffel bags and a sob story about his landlord being a total freak who kicked him out for no reason. Yeah, right. I let him crash on my couch, which turned into my spare room, which turned into a 3-month nightmare. Ruby, come on, it's just a few friends, he'd say when I'd come home from a 12-hour shift to find 4 guys I didn't know sprawled across my living room with empty beer bottles everywhere. Jake, we talked about this. No parties on weeknights, I'd remind him, knowing he didn't give a damn. The last straw was walking in on him and some girl I'd never seen before going at it on my couch. My couch, the one I'd saved for months to buy. That's it. You've got a week to find somewhere else, I told him that night. Of course, he ran crying to Mom and Dad, and suddenly I was the bad guy. Mom called me in tears saying I was being cruel, that family helps family. Dad got on the phone and said I was being selfish, that Jake was going through a phase. A phase? He's 26. I'd yelled back. When I was 26, I was paying my own bills and sending you guys money every month for his tuition. That call ended with me hanging up, and we didn't speak for 2 months after that. Eventually, things smoothed over, mostly because I backed down and apologized first, like always, but I never forgot how quick they were to side with Jake over me. Story of my life. So when Mom called last week and invited me to dinner on Saturday, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was just the usual monthly family dinner that we'd started doing again. Ruby, honey, it's been too long. Come over around 6. Okay. Dad's grilling steaks, she said, sounding genuinely excited. Sure, Mom. Need me to bring anything? Just yourself, sweetie. I showed up at my parents' small ranch house at exactly 6 p.m. with a bottle of wine. Mom hugged me at the door, and I could hear Dad and Jake's voices coming from the living room. But there was another voice too. A woman's laugh I didn't recognize. When I walked in, Jake had his arm around a blonde woman I'd never seen before. She was pretty in that Instagram filter kind of way, lots of makeup, perfectly styled hair, expensive-looking clothes. Ruby, Jake jumped up. This is Megan, my fiancé. I nearly choked. Fiancé? Since when? 3 weeks ago, Megan answered before Jake could, holding out her hand to show off a ring that looked way too expensive for Jake's non-existent bank account. Jake's told me so much about you, she added. Mom and Dad were beaming at them like Jake had just announced he'd cured cancer or something. Dad kept refilling their glasses, and Mom couldn't stop touching Megan's arm and saying things like, "Isn't she just gorgeous, Ruby?" Throughout dinner, I noticed Megan had this way of talking over people and making everything about her. When I mentioned a promotion I was up for at work, she immediately cut in with a story about how she once got headhunted by some fancy company in New York. So, what do you do, Megan? I finally asked. Oh, I'm between jobs right now. I was in fashion marketing, but I'm looking for something more fulfilling. The way she said it made it sound like she was too good for regular employment. I nodded and took another bite of steak. Something felt off about this whole setup, but I couldn't put my finger on it. After dinner, Mom cleared her throat and looked at Dad, who nodded. Ruby, honey, there's something we wanted to talk to you about. It's actually why we invited you tonight, Mom said, folding her hands on the table. I thought it was to meet Megan. I glanced at Jake and his girlfriend, fiancé, who were both staring at me with weird expressions. Well, yes, that too. But there's something else. Mom took a deep breath. Your father and I have been discussing, and we've decided that you should help Jake and Megan with their apartment. I put down my fork. You mean like help them find a place? Dad shook his head. No. We'll be giving them the security deposit and first month's rent. But we thought, given your good salary and all that, you could take care of their monthly rent after that. I looked around the table. Everyone was watching me expectantly, like they were waiting for me to break out my checkbook right then and there. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You want me to pay Jake and Megan's rent every month? Mom nodded. Just until Jake finds a better job. And Megan too, of course. I looked at my brother, who had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, and then at Megan, who didn't look embarrassed at all. No, I said, putting my napkin down. Absolutely not. The silence at the table was deafening after my flat refusal. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares as I stood up and reached for my purse. Mom was the first to break the silence. Ruby, think about what you're saying. Your brother needs you. He's 28, Mom, an adult. He doesn't need me to pay his rent. Dad's face had turned that particular shade of red it always did when he was angry. So that's it? You won't help your own brother. I looked at Jake, who was studying his plate intensely, and Megan, who had the audacity to look offended. Neither of them said a word in their own defense. They were content to let my parents fight their battle. Jake can get a job like everyone else, I said, slinging my purse over my shoulder. And so can Megan. 2 incomes should be more than enough to rent an apartment. Mom stood up then, her voice rising. Your brother is looking for work. He just hasn't found the right opportunity yet. And Megan needs time to find something worthy of her talents. I almost laughed at that. Worthy of her talents? She'd known Jake for a few months? And she was already working my parents like a pro. This conversation is over, I said, moving toward the door. I'm not paying their rent. End of story. Mom followed me, her face twisted with anger. If you walk out that door without agreeing to help, there will be consequences. I paused at the door, looked back at her, and said, Good night, Mom, before walking out and letting the door slam behind me. The drive home was a blur. My hand shook on the steering wheel as I replayed the conversation in my head, the absolute nerve of them. I'd always been the responsible one, the one who worked through college and gave most of my paycheck to my parents to help with bills. The one who took a job right after graduation and immediately started sending money home to help with Jake's tuition. Money that was essentially wasted when he dropped out. By the time I got back to my apartment, my phone was already blowing up with texts. First from Jake, come on, sis. Don't be like this. Then from Mom, I'm very disappointed in your selfishness tonight. Dad, call your mother. She's upset. And finally, unbelievably, from Megan, whose number I didn't even have saved, Jake told me you'd be difficult. Guess he was right. I turned my phone off and threw it on the couch. I needed a moment of peace to process this insanity. The next morning, there were more messages waiting. All variations on the same theme. I was selfish, I didn't care about family. I had the means to help and was choosing not to. Not one of them acknowledged that what they were asking was completely unreasonable. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I threw myself into work. The end of the year was approaching, and we were preparing for the annual performance reviews. I'd been killing it this year, increased guest satisfaction scores, reduced staff turnover, and even found ways to cut costs without sacrificing quality. My boss had hinted that a substantial bonus might be coming my way. Sure enough, when review time came around, I was called into the regional manager's office. She slid an envelope across the desk to me with a smile. Ruby, your performance this year has been exceptional. We're pleased to offer you this bonus as a token of our appreciation. I opened the envelope and had to stop myself from gasping. The bonus was nearly double what I'd expected. With this added to my savings, I finally had enough for a down payment on my own place. That evening, I called my old college roommate Diane, who'd gone into real estate after graduation. I think I'm finally ready to buy a place. Can you help me look? Ruby, that's amazing. Of course, I can help. Let me pull up some listings that might work for you. Over the next few weeks, Diane and I looked at countless apartments. I wanted something close to work, with good natural light and enough space for me to feel comfortable. My parents and Jake remained silent during this time, which was a relief. I assumed they'd finally accepted my decision and moved on. I found the perfect place on a Saturday afternoon, a one-bedroom condo in a secure building with a small balcony overlooking a park. The kitchen had been recently renovated, and the bedroom was spacious enough for the king-sized bed I'd been dreaming of. Most importantly, it was mine. Or it would be as soon as the paperwork went through. I'll put in an offer today, Diane promised. With your pre-approval and the market right now, I think we've got a good shot. I didn't tell my family about the condo. I knew exactly what would happen if I did. They'd start making plans for Jake and Megan to move in with me. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a split second, I considered not answering. I wish I hadn't. When I opened the door, I found my parents standing there with Jake and Megan behind them. Mom didn't wait for an invitation. She simply pushed past me into the apartment. Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? I asked, stunned by their sudden appearance. Mom ignored me completely. Instead, she turned to Megan and began gesturing around my apartment like a tour guide. This is the living room, of course. The kitchen is through there. Ruby's bedroom is the master at the end of the hall. That will be yours and Jake's. Ruby can take the pull-out couch in here. I stood frozen in disbelief as Megan nodded approvingly, inspecting my space like she was considering buying it. It's smaller than I expected, but I guess it'll do for now, she said. Finally finding my voice, I stepped between them. What exactly is happening right now? Mom turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Don't you remember what I said at dinner? There would be consequences if you didn't help. Well, this is it. Jake and Megan will be moving in here with you. They'll take your bedroom and you'll sleep in the living room. We won't have to pay rent, Jake added, having the decency to at least look slightly uncomfortable. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell them all to get out, but then a thought occurred to me. My apartment application had been approved 2 days ago. I was just waiting for the final paperwork to be processed before I could move in. So instead of the argument they were clearly expecting, I forced a smile. You know what, fine, but I need 2 weeks to get everything arranged. I need to talk to my landlord and prepare for you guys moving in. The look of shock on their faces was almost worth the humiliation of the ambush. Mom recovered quickly, though. Well, good. I'm glad you're finally being reasonable. The moment they left my apartment, I called Diane. My hands were shaking with a mix of anger and nervous excitement as I explained the situation. I need to close on that condo as soon as possible, I told her. Like yesterday. Diane understood immediately. I'll push everything through. We can probably close by the end of next week if the seller agrees to expedite. The next morning, I called my landlord, Mr. Peterson. He'd always been fair with me, and I hoped he'd understand my predicament. So you're moving out, but your brother might stay? He asked after I'd explained the situation in vague terms. I paid through the end of the month, I said. But yes, I'm leaving. My brother might try to stay longer, but he doesn't have a lease with you. There was a pause before Mr. Peterson responded. I appreciate the heads up. After your lease term ends, if your brother wants to stay, he'll need to apply and sign his own lease. Otherwise, he'll need to vacate. Relief washed over me. Thank you for understanding. The next week was a whirlwind of paperwork, packing, and planning. Diane worked miracles with the seller and the bank, and by Friday, I was signing the final documents on my new condo. I'd never seen so many papers requiring my signature, but each one felt like a step toward freedom. That weekend, I quietly moved most of my belongings to my new place. I hired movers for the larger furniture and made several trips with my car for the smaller items. By Sunday night, all that remained in my rental apartment were some basic necessities, enough to make it look like I still lived there. My new condo felt surreal. The gleaming countertops, the fresh paint smell, the echo of my footsteps on floors that belonged to me. I spent Sunday night there, sleeping on a mattress on the floor because my bed frame hadn't been delivered yet. Still, it was the best sleep I'd had in weeks. On Monday, I returned to my rental and left for work as usual. For the next few days, I maintained the charade, stopping by the rental after work to pick up mail before heading to my condo for the night. Jake texted a few times asking when exactly they could move in, and I kept responding with still working out details with the landlord. By the following Saturday, everything was in place. I left a spare key to the rental under the mat as I'd promised. Jake then drove to my condo with the last of my belongings. Around noon, my phone rang. Jake and Megan had arrived at the rental apartment. I answered with false cheer. "Hey, you guys all moved in?" "Yeah, we're here," Jake replied. "Where are you?" "Oh, I got called away on a business trip last minute," I lied. "I'll be gone for about a week. Make yourselves at home." I could hear Megan in the background asking who he was talking to. Jake relayed my message, and I heard Megan's response loud and clear. "Good. Tell her to stay on her trip as long as possible." Jake laughed awkwardly. "Megan says hi. So, anything we should know about the place?" "Just that I've already spoken with Mr. Peterson, the landlord. He knows I'm out of town." I left it at that, letting Jake assume whatever he wanted. Cool, Jake said distractedly. "Well, have a good trip." I hung up and smiled to myself as I unpacked the last box in my new bedroom. The week passed quickly. I went to work, came home to my condo, and enjoyed the peace of not having to deal with my family's drama. I didn't respond to any texts from my parents asking how the arrangement was working out. Then, exactly a week after Jake and Megan moved in, my phone exploded with calls from Jake. I let the first few go to voicemail, but when he called for the 5th time in a row, I finally answered. "Jake, what's going on?" "Ruby, you need to come back right now. The landlord came by today and said, our rent is only paid until the end of the month. He says, after that, I either need to sign a new lease or get out." I feigned confusion. "Well, yeah, that's how renting works, Jake. But Mom and Dad said you were going to let us stay at your place for free." "I never agreed to that," I replied calmly. "And anyway, it's not my place anymore." I moved out. There was a long silence before Jake exploded. "You what? Where are you living then?" "I bought my own condo," I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "I've been saving for years, and I finally had enough for a down payment." "So you just left us here with no place to go after the month ends?" Jake's voice had risen to a near shout. "You have plenty of options, Jake. Get a job and pay rent, move back with Mom and Dad, find a cheaper place. Those are all the same options you had before. You tried to take over my apartment, Jake." He hung up on me. 15 minutes later, my mother called. I braced myself and answered. "Ruby Mitchell, what have you done?" she demanded without preamble. "I bought my own place, Mom. I'm a homeowner now." I tried to inject some excitement into my voice, hoping against hope that she might actually be happy for me. "No such luck. You deliberately set your brother up. You let him think he could stay in your apartment." "No, I let you all think that because you didn't give me a choice. You literally showed up at my door and announced you were taking my bedroom. That's because you refused to help your brother." She was nearly screaming now. "And now you bought a place? Well, then you can give Jake and Megan your address and they'll move in with you there." I took a deep breath. "No, Mom. That's not happening. I'm not giving anyone my new address, and Jake is never moving in with me again." My mother's anger erupted through the phone. She called me ungrateful, selfish, and a whole host of other names I'd rather not repeat. I held the phone away from my ear until her tirade subsided. "Are you finished?" I asked when she finally paused for breath. "Don't you dare take that tone with me. I raised you better than this. You raised me to be independent and self-sufficient. That's exactly what I'm being. You were raised to help family, she countered. I have helped family for years. I helped pay for Jake's college, which he dropped out of. I let him live with me until he brought strangers into my home and disrespected my space. I've been helping since I was 18, Mom. It's Jake's turn to help himself. She hung up on me. I stared at my phone for a moment, then blocked all their numbers, my mom, my dad, Jake, and even Megan. I needed peace. I needed time to enjoy the home I'd worked so hard for without their constant guilt trips and demands. That night, I wandered through my new condo, running my hands along the walls, opening and closing cabinets, sitting on my couch, and just taking in the fact that this space was mine, all mine. No landlord to answer to, no roommates to consider, just me and the home I'd earned. For the next 2 months, I lived in a peaceful bubble. I decorated my condo with furniture I'd carefully selected, painted an accent wall in the living room a bold teal color, and even started a small herb garden on my balcony. Work was going well, and I was being considered for another promotion. Life felt good, stable, like I was finally on solid ground. I didn't completely cut off all connections to my family's world, though. I still kept in touch with a few mutual friends who knew both me and Jake. That's how I learned that Jake and Megan had moved back in with my parents. According to my friend Tara, who ran into my mom at the grocery store, the situation at my parents' house was tense. Jake and Megan had taken over the spare bedroom. Neither of them was working, and my parents were supporting them entirely. Mom had apparently complained to Tara about how tight money was getting, how Dad was picking up extra shifts at the warehouse to make ends meet. I felt a twinge of sympathy for my parents, but it was quickly replaced by frustration. They had created this situation. They had enabled Jake's behavior for years, and now they were dealing with the consequences of raising a son who expected everything to be handed to him. One evening, I came home from work and checked my personal email. Among the usual promotions and newsletters was an unexpected message from my father's email address. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. The email was short, just a few paragraphs. Ruby, I don't know if you'll even read this, but I wanted to apologize. Your mother and I were wrong to put so much pressure on you to support Jake. He's our son and his choices are our responsibility, not yours. Things have been difficult here with him and Megan living with us. We're trying to encourage them to find work, but it's been challenging. I miss hearing from you. If you're willing, give me a call sometime. Love, Dad. I read the email 3 times. It was the first acknowledgement from either of my parents that maybe, just maybe, they'd been unfair to me. It wasn't a complete apology. There was no mention of the ambush at my apartment or the years of favoritism toward Jake, but it was something. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to process, to decide what kind of relationship I wanted with my family moving forward. I wasn't ready to let them back into my life completely, not when the wounds were still so fresh. But I was open to the possibility of reconnecting on new terms, my terms. A week later, my work phone rang. It was the receptionist from the lobby. Ruby, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says he's your father. My heart skipped a beat. I'll be right down. Dad was standing awkwardly in the lobby, hands in his pockets, looking older than I remembered. When he saw me, his face lit up with a tentative smile. We went to a cafe across the street. For the first time and maybe ever, my father really talked to me, not at me, not about Jake, but to me. He told me how things had deteriorated at home, how Megan had taken over, making demands, treating my parents like hotel staff. How Jake just went along with it, never standing up to her or taking initiative to find work. Your mother doesn't want to admit it, he said softly, but we made mistakes with Jake. We thought we were helping him, but we were just making him dependent on us. I nodded, sipping my coffee, letting him talk. And we were unfair to you, he continued. We expected too much because you were always so capable, so responsible. We took advantage of that. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. It was the validation I'd been waiting for, the acknowledgement I'd needed for so long. Dad reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm proud of you, Ruby, for standing your ground, for building your own life." I know I haven't said that enough. We talked for nearly 2 hours about everything and nothing. About my new condo and my job. About his worries for retirement with the extra strain of supporting Jake and Megan. We didn't solve everything. Mom was still angry. Jake was still unemployed, and years of hurt feelings couldn't be erased in one conversation. But it was a start. As we parted, Dad hugged me tightly. "I won't tell your mother or Jake that we met," he promised. "That's your choice, when and if you're ready." Walking back to work, I felt lighter somehow. I had started to let go of the long-held bitterness and resentment and make place for something new. Not quite forgiveness, not just yet, but the potential. I still had no regrets about my choice to assert my rights, set limits, and take ownership of the life I had earned. Being selfish isn't always the same thing. Self-preservation is the only reason sometimes. And when you eventually prioritize yourself, people occasionally start to see your value as well. I had never had such a sense of calm in my quiet condo that night, surrounded by items I had personally selected and purchased. Brick by brick, money after paycheck, I had constructed this existence. No one would, and no one could, take it from me.